Why was Paul arrested in Philippi? How does helping a slave girl result in a capital punishment? Can such a graphic story still offer us any encouragement today? In this week's video, we're on site in Philippi looking for answers to these questions. We visit the judgment seat where Paul's trial took place, we take a closer look at the background of the charges, and we consider his response to the authorities and the challenge it offers us today. Stay tuned to find out.
We've already seen the story over at the baptism pool of basically Paul's first Saturday in Philippi. He meets Lydia and kind of the rest is history. But it's only a few weeks later he's going back to the place of prayer, so he's coming through the marketplace and another event happens because just typical of Paul, he just can't stay out of trouble no matter where he goes. It's a story you're familiar with, but I just wondered if we could just pull it apart a little bit more and put it into a bit of a deeper context of what was going on. So it's Acts 16:16. It says, once we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. The Greek here it's Pythona pneuma, literally a python spirit. And what the spirit was the spirit of Apollo. So we're going to go down to the temple of Apollo in Delphi, and you'll see how far away it is. It's a long drive, let alone a walk for someone in the ancient world. But the reason you went down to Apollo's temple was to find out to find out the future. You're about to make an important decision, and so you go and consult Apollo. You want to get a word of prophecy from him as to what do I do about this. And so there's a whole process that goes on there, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But that's a long trip. That could take weeks, months to do that. And so what if you had sort of a satellite version of the temple here in Philippi? What if you had a local version of that where you could just come into the marketplace? And so that's exactly what Philippi had. They had this young girl who was possessed by the same spirit. And so she was doing the same thing that they were doing down at the temple. And so for our owners, this is great. What a great business. You don't have to go down to the temple, just come and see us. And we've got a slave girl here who can tell you whatever you need to know. So it's good business for them. You can imagine, it's an incredible business that they have there. And so this, as the story goes, she followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At the moment, the spirit left her. The first time I read that, I thought, why would you do that? Like, you've got a cheer squad following you around everywhere. Like, she's Paul's John the Baptist going ahead of him saying, you need to listen to this guy. He's got a great thing you need to hear. Like, why would you drive that out? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But you have to look closely at what she says. She says, these men are servants of the Most High God. There's lots of gods. Their one's the best. That's not the message, is it? There are no other gods. Our God isn't the best amongst many. Our God is the only God. And so she's trying to water it down, just trying to bring it back down into polytheism. Believe in all of your gods, but this God's pretty powerful. Listen to Paul's God. He's pretty cool. But then she says, who are telling you the way to be saved. Now in our English translations it says the way to be saved. In the Greek, you don't have the article. So for all you Greek students go, ooh, that changes things. It doesn't say the way, it could be translated a way to be saved. There's lots of ways to be saved, and this is one of them. It sounds perfect, doesn't it? To somebody who has no idea what they're listening to, it sounds like Jesus, it all sounds right, but just the slightest changes, it's heresy. The whole thing comes undone. And so to all these people that are in the marketplace who are hearing Paul and they're hearing this girl, they don't know how to discern the difference between that. And so Paul says, it starts to drive him crazy. I mean, call me Pentecostal, but I just picture this girl just following him for days and weeks. And Paul because he knows what's going to happen. This is the thing. He knows what's about to happen if he drives this demon out. He knows that hell is going to break loose on him. And so you can imagine this demon. It's nothing to do with the girl. It's the demon that's in her doing all the work. Just following him around day after day, just nagging at him. Just nagging. The Spirit doesn't care about the girl, and certainly doesn't care about Paul. It's just messing with him. And so you can imagine Paul resisting this. He'd want to deal with this on day one, but this thing is just following day after day after day until eventually he weighs up his options. This is undermining the message. I've got to pay the cost. So he drives this demon out. I could just, again, sorry about the Pentecostalism, but I can just imagine this spirit just coming out of this girl. Gotcha. I'm off. And then all hell breaks loose. Verse 19, when her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them to the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews, and they're throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." So they bring them to the marketplace. The ancient world is a world where you live outdoors. Everything is done outside, and it all happens in here. And so there's always a crowd here. And here is the Bema seat. This is the seat of judgment, where judgment takes place. And so they would have brought them here for judgment. Now, the crime itself was an economic crime. There was nothing really bad about it. These guys are going to lose some money. Paul should have just paid compensation and everyone moves on. But notice they don't even mention what happened. Look at the charges. These men are Jews. What's that got to do with anything? What does their ethnicity have to do with this? Well, about 6 months prior to this, in 49, there was a dispute in the Jewish community in Rome, and Claudius, the emperor, had just kicked all the Jews out. He said, "Just get out. I'm just sick of all the arguing, just get out." Now, if the emperor doesn't like the Jews, that means that everybody hates the Jews, particularly the magistrates, who are Rome's representatives in a Roman colony. He doesn't like them, we don't like him. And so they don't lead with what they actually did. They lead with these men are Jews. Notice how they're not us. They're not Macedonians, they're not Roman citizens. These men are Jews. And so already the crowd that's gathering around is already eyeballing the Jews, going, "Yeah, you're already the bad. I don't even know what you've done yet, but that's enough to know that you're on the wrong side of this story." It says they're throwing our city into an uproar. How? The irony is the only people throwing the city into an uproar are the idiots that are bringing the charges. Paul and Silas could have gone in their merry way. These are the ones that are starting the problem. But of course, now we don't like the Jews, so we're going to blame Paul and Silas for whatever's about to go down. And he says they're advocating customs that's unlawful for us as Romans to do. Not Macedonians, but Romans. What are the customs? Worship Jesus Christ. What's the Roman custom? Worship Caesar. In a Roman colony loyal to the emperor. They're advocating a different God. They're advocating somebody who's trying to usurp Caesar, and you as his representative. See, the job of the governor was simple. Two things he had to do. Keep the peace, collect the taxes. That's it. So you start to usurp that authority, that's insurrection, that's treason. That's a real problem. So the crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they'd been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in stocks. So the magistrate, the governor of this region, he was the only one who had the power of life and death. And what he would have had with him was a group of soldiers, effectively. They were called lictors, L-I-C-T-O-R-S, lictors, and they were his hitmen. What they would have carried around with them was a bundle of thick rods, and in the middle of that bundle was an axe. And each one of them would have had one of these, and they weren't just a symbol of authority, but they were the implement of authority as well. So there's really only two punishments you're going to get. You're going to get flogged, or you're going to get your head cut off. There's really nothing in between. And the axe and the rods, well, that's what this represents. Now this bundle of rods, in the Latin, it's called a fasces, F-A-S-C-E-S, fasces. It's where we get the word fascism from. It's authority by power. And so they would have been there with the magistrates, because the idea is when you don't put someone in prison for 10 years to punish, prisons aren't used for punishment. They're used to hold you until we can bring you to trial. But ideally, we deal with it here on the spot. So they strip Paul down. Now, what was it about Paul? What was that thing again that he had to his name? Oh, that's right, Roman citizenship. He's a Roman citizen. You do not touch a Roman citizen without trial. That is illegal. And we see in the morning, when all of this was over and they found out he's a citizen, they freak out. They've punished him without trial. That's a death sentence. So the question you have to ask yourself, they strip Paul naked, a Roman citizen, and then they flog him severely, treat him like a common criminal, and then throw him in a prison, in a dark hole. At any point in that proceeding, all he had to say were these words, civis, what was the word? I am a Roman citizen. I am a Roman citizen. That's it. Everything stops. All proceedings stop. If you can prove your citizenship, well, now we go to trial. Now we do this thing properly. That's all he had to say. But he doesn't say a word. Why? He didn't have to go through that. He could have bypassed all of that. Why didn't he? Well, there's several theories, and they're probably all correct. One, it would have taken him time to go and maybe get his documents. They might have been back in Tarsus. That might have taken months. Paul didn't have that sort of time. Someone would have to go back to Tarsus while Paul's in prison, bring the documents back to prove that he's a Roman citizen. That's probability number one. Number two, we don't know if Silas was a Roman citizen. Probably wasn't, in fact. The locals were, but he probably wasn't. So Silas didn't have that excuse. Silas couldn't have got out of this. But more than that, the people that Paul's preaching to, in some cases, probably aren't citizens themselves. So in Paul's mind, he's like, option A, I can get out of this, and they can't touch me. But then I have to go and preach to all these people that don't have that option. They don't have the same, I can just get out of jail free card. They would have to go through it. How can I look them in the eyes and say, well, I got out of it, but you're going to suffer it? Sorry to say it, if you're a citizen like me, you wouldn't have to, but hey, I guess that's just my citizen privilege. How do you relate to that audience? And so for Paul, it's far easier, far quicker, and, well, far more effective just to deal with it the same way that everybody else would have, even though he was a citizen, even though he had the right to say, stop. I don't care about the scars on my back. Just add them to the pile that's already on there. Paul says to the Corinthians, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. That's 200 lashes with a double over whip. 3 times from the Romans. Romans didn't stop at 40. They just hit you till their arm was tired. You got to imagine Paul's back. It was scar tissue on scar tissue. By the end of his life, I can only imagine how hard it would have been to get up on a cold morning just to stretch that skin out. Forget about all the other beatings. Just his back. He said, what's another few beatings between friends if it allows me to be able to stand with any authority and speak to you guys tomorrow and say, let me tell you about the Jesus who also suffered for us. How can I be better than my Lord on the cross? Who am I? See, for Paul, those scars were what brought him closer to Christ. The suffering was what made him feel the closest to Christ on the cross. Because in this world, that's what it took. I'll leave you with that.
Well, hey there, thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Don't forget, if you want to go deeper on this topic, you can check out the podcast. The links for that are in the description below. But otherwise, thank you again, and I'll see you next time.